What's up, everybody? This is the Unstuck Podcast, and I'm your host, Drew Cause. Have you been feeling like you want to talk about everything, but everyone is telling you niche down? Or you're hearing this phrase, you are the niche. If that's confusing you, take a deep breath. I'm going to give you some answers today. So, I'm going to start off by telling you guys when we hear the slogan or the term "you are the niche," that is true and that's false, right? Some of my favorite people who I study say that. I love them to death, but they're not giving you some of the other context. Yes, you are the niche. Building your personal brand out, that's important. That's what you should do. But you also have to realize if you're doing this for business, if you're making content to aid to your personal brand, to get customers, you have to have a lane of some sort. You have to. If you don't, you're going to get ran over by people who do have a lane. So if you're like, I want to talk about 30 things, you have the freedom to do that. The success rate just may not be the same. So let's just look at this in some different aspects so that you can understand what I mean and I can help you out. When I make content, there's a couple things I can talk about. I could talk about a lot of things, but because I'm trying to be in a lane, and I'll tell you that lane as we go along, there's a couple things that I can talk about. I'm talking to the person, to the Drew, 3 to 6 years ago. This was Drew, pre-married, just getting married, no kids, to having kids, to having a business, to wanting to quit the business, to wanting to grow the business. So those are the things I talk about a lot. And I talk about men healing because that was also in that process or in that lane. Now, within that lane, who I had to become are also things that I talk about. So I talk a lot about spiritual development. I talk about personal development. I talk about business development. And there are little subtopics that come from those three topics. But that's usually the lane that I'm going to stay in because I want to help the person who I was 3 to 6 years ago. Were there podcasts out that did that? Probably, but I didn't know about them. I don't think they were done by an African American man, and that's what I am. So that's where I stick at in that area. Now, this allows me to reach people who want to grow spiritually, men or women. This allows me to help people who want to intentionally put time into their personal development. That can be men or women. People who want to have better businesses, business development. That can be men or women. But I'm usually talking to just the old Drew from 3 to 6 years ago. So let's break down how I approach this content making process and how you can approach it. If I'm covering those three areas, I want to think, what are the main topics that does not get discussed that I think people are thinking? So let me say that again. What are the main topics that does not get discussed that I think people are thinking about? When it comes to spiritual, one of the things that people don't think about is, why do we serve God? How should we serve people? Why doesn't God talk back to us the way we want? Those can be just examples of how I would approach content spiritually because I want engagement. I want people to actually know, like, somebody else is thinking these questions as well. If I was going towards personal development, I would always say you cannot have good personal development without forgiveness, right? Without healing. We all know by now, if you have things, roadblocks that are blocking you from healing and you have a lot of hate and bitterness, that's going to limit your personal development because you're not going to trust anybody to help you. With personal development as well, how much time do you want to invest in making yourself better? That's a choice, right? And I also talk a lot about you don't need to be working from 2 a.m. to 2 a.m. the next day in order to get results. You probably need to trim some of the fat. Business development, the route I go with that is helping coaches create better content, understand content for their business. Why? Because for years I made content, but I wasn't making content that was engaging, that was specific towards an audience. I just made it. So with those three categories, I'm going to challenge you. What are the main three things you want to talk about? Again, you can talk about everything, but if you're trying to actually get customers and get better, you probably want to pick three things. Even if you're like a church leader, pick three things that you talk about a lot. So when people know you or hear your voice or see you, they know I'm going to get answers on these three subjects. Let's just say I was a youth pastor or something like that. I'm not, but let's say I was. Three things I would talk about is number one, healthy sex. Why? Because most churches don't talk about healthy sex. They look at sex as that taboo subject, but then all of the youth are getting it in. As Will Smith would say, getting jiggy with it. Okay, I digress. I would talk about healthy sex. I would talk about what does purpose look like today? What did it look like back then? Because usually most leaders think people are going to follow the same exact steps that they followed. That's not true. The third thing I might talk about is how do you serve God in a culture that wants to do whatever they want? And I would just go into many topics about those big topics. The reason why is because that's usually what's on their mind. And I would do it through social media. Because they're there. Let's say I was a hairdresser. Things I would talk about as a hairdresser is how do women actually repair their hair without spending thousands of dollars? Why women need to come to the hairdresser twice a week. Third one would probably be picking the right stylist for your type of hair. I just would choose things that they're thinking about. And that's what I actually teach my students. Get into the mind of the people who you want to serve. I wish at that time, I got a lot of like business tips and personal development tips, but I wish there was somebody at that time that was aiming at African American men. Mr. Jason does that now a lot. He's way more vibrant on social media, but he does that now, talking about like, hey, how does it feel not having a father? How does it feel not doing well? And he does it in a way where he's asking you the question, and then there's a challenge to move past that. So it's not just him doom and gloom and only talking about trauma. He's giving an example, he's giving you a solution, and he's giving you a challenge. That's a good way to think about content. This way you're not completely stuck talking about everything all the time. Yes, you can get creative. I want you to get creative. I want you to have fun with it. I also want you to be able to support your business. I want you to be able to pay your bills so that you can keep doing what you're doing. If you're doing this for a hobby, this is not the podcast for you. If you're doing it just to do it, this is not the podcast for you. There's tons of others like that. But I want people, especially coaches, to be able to grow their business and use content as a way to do that. Without content, you are not going to have a business for long. Because it's usually about who's seen more, not who just shows up. And if there's somebody, if you show up once a week, I tell all my clients, if you show up once a week to produce and another person shows up 5 times a week to produce, the people are going to look at that person as the authority, the expert. They may not even be, but they're just showing up more. Think about that. And then think about the leader or the expert, the coach who shows up with clarity. Confused minds do not buy. Confused people do not buy. Show up with clarity. And my last tip, and I know I'm going to get stoned for this one. Stop hiding. Stop hiding behind just pictures and quotes. Stop hiding behind pictures and quotes. You need to show up on video. The world needs to see you. The world needs to hear you. So my takeaway, go think about 3 things that you really want to talk about. If you want to take my idea, adopt my style is I'm talking to the Drew 3 to 6 years ago. So this gives me some range, but it also gives me a lane, like a highway. Go be great, guys. Go be great.